Long before maps, compasses, or written history, ancient seafarers pushed their canoes beyond the last visible island and into the largest ocean on Earth. Guided only by stars, swells, winds, and birds, they discovered lands hidden thousands of miles beyond the horizon and may even have reached the Americas centuries before Europeans crossed the Pacific. Who were these forgotten navigators, and how did they survive journeys that still seem almost impossible today? Before we sail deeper into their lost world, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more ancient mysteries and forgotten history. Night has erased the horizon, and the canoe seems to hang between two darknesses. Above, the stars burn with a clarity unknown to most eyes. Below, the Pacific moves in long black swells, lifting the vessel toward land that no one aboard can see. There is no map, no compass needle, no written log, no metal instrument measuring position. The people in the canoe possess none of the devices later ages will consider essential for ocean travel. Yet they are not lost. They move through a known world built from memory, observation, rhythm, and generations of experience. Somewhere beyond the curve of the sea lies an island that can vanish inside the immensity around it, and they intend to find it. The scale of that intention is difficult to grasp. The Pacific Ocean covers 1/3 of the planet. Many islands rise only a few meters above sea level, invisible from surprisingly short distances, while others stand alone beyond hundreds or thousands of kilometers of open water. To reach them is not simply to follow a coastline or drift from one visible shore to another. It is to leave land behind completely, to sail until every familiar shape sinks beneath the horizon, and to continue into a moving landscape where the road itself leaves no trace. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Long before European explorers begin drawing the Pacific onto charts, human communities are already crossing its western margins. The first steps remain imperfectly understood. Modern humans enter Southeast Asia tens of thousands of years ago, when sea levels are lower and coastlines look very different from those of the present. Even then, water separates many islands. Reaching places such as New Guinea and Australia requires sea crossing short by later Polynesian standards, but decisive. These journeys do not prove that the earliest travellers possessed the same vessels or navigational systems used much later across remote Oceania, but they establish something fundamental. The sea is not an absolute barrier. As generations pass, ice sheets melt, oceans rise, and low plains disappear beneath the water. Bays widen, channels deepen, and familiar hunting grounds become islands. Communities living in this drowned world cannot treat the ocean as empty space. It feeds them, separates them, and connects them. Fish, shellfish, turtles, seabirds, reefs, tides, and seasonal winds become woven into daily knowledge. A child raised near such shores learns that water has structure. Currents pull in recognizable directions. Swells arrive from storms far beyond sight. Clouds gather differently over land. Birds depart in the morning and return near dusk. Floating branches seeds insects, and even the smell of vegetation can signal that a coast lies beyond the horizon. Nothing about this knowledge is crude. It is precise, although its precision is carried in bodies and memories rather than instruments. A modern chart reduces the sea to symbols fixed on paper. An ancient navigator carries a changing chart internally, one that includes islands, winds, stars, and the way waves bend around unseen land. Much of this expertise leaves no archaeological object behind. A broken pot can survive for 3,000 years, but a remembered star path disappears when the last trained navigator dies. Archaeologists recover the durable remains of settlement, while the knowledge that made the voyage possible often vanishes. The people who eventually settle the most remote reaches of the Pacific do not see themselves as entering a blank ocean. The idea of emptiness belongs largely to outsiders who arrive later and mistake distance for isolation. To island societies, sea routes can function like roads. An island may be days from its neighbour, yet tied to it through marriage exchange, ancestry and ritual. The ocean can be dangerous, but so can a mountain pass a desert or a winter forest. Danger does not make movement impossible. It makes preparation more important. What survives in the record suggests that the settlement of the Pacific is not one single migration, and not the work of one mysterious vanished race. It unfolds in multiple phases involving different populations, changing technologies, encounters, pauses, and renewed expansions. Some movements take place along island chains where land is nearby. Others push into regions where the gaps become enormous. At times, voyagers return home. At other times, they establish communities that remain connected to their places of origin for generations. Some expeditions almost certainly fail. The ocean does not preserve the names of those who miss their destination, lose a sail, exhaust their water, or vanish in a storm. Failure, however, cannot explain the inhabited islands scattered across the Pacific. Their existence demands successful landfalls repeated many times. People arrive not merely alive, but with enough companions, tools, food, plants, and social organization to build enduring settlements. Finding an island once may be luck. Reaching many distant islands, founding viable populations, and maintaining networks across open sea requires method. Scholars still debate the exact timing and routes of many early voyages because the evidence remains incomplete. Rising seas have submerged ancient shorelines where camps and boat landings may once have stood. Tropical conditions destroy wood fibre sailcloth and human remains. Later settlements are often built directly over earlier ones. Oral histories preserve powerful memories, but they change through generations and cannot always be matched neatly to archaeological dates. Genetics, language artifacts, and environmental clues each reveal part of the story, yet no single line of evidence fully accounts for the whole expansion. Still, the broad outline is clear. Human beings transform the largest ocean on Earth from an apparent void into a lived geography. They learn not only how to survive at sea, but how to imagine land beyond sight. A voyage begins before a canoe touches water. It begins when a community accepts that the horizon is not an ending, when signs carried by wind and birds become evidence of another shore, and when memory is trusted strongly enough to guide people into darkness. The forgotten seafarers of the Pacific are forgotten only from the perspective of written history. Their descendants remember them in genealogies, chants, place names and traditions of voyaging. The ocean remembers differently. It holds no roads, wheel ruts, or ruined milestones. Each generation must read it again. Yet across thousands of islands, human settlement remains the enduring mark of journeys made without paper compass, or certainty journeys that begin along the maritime edges of island Southeast Asia, where coast forest and open water form the first great training ground for the world's most extraordinary seafaring expansion. Along the coasts and islands of Southeast Asia, the world is already shaped by water. Shorelines curve around mangrove forests, volcanic ridges descend toward protected bays, and channels separate communities that can see one another's mountains, yet still depend on boats to meet. In this environment, the earliest foundations of Pacific voyaging do not emerge from a single invention or one legendary expedition. They grow slowly from ordinary life. Fishing grounds lie offshore. Shell beds shift with the tides. Forests supply timber, resin fibre, and food. Storm seasons demand caution. Monsoon winds reward those who understand their timing. The people who live here do not merely occupy islands, they become specialists in moving between them. By roughly the 4th and 3rd millennia before the present, communities associated with the spread of Austronesian languages begin expanding southward and eastward from Taiwan into the northern Philippines and beyond. The movement is complex and scholars still debate its exact pace, local variations and relationship with earlier populations already living throughout the region. It is not a simple story of one people replacing another. Migrants arrive in landscapes that have been inhabited for tens of thousands of years. They trade, intermarry, compete, adapt, and exchange knowledge. What develops is a maritime world built from contact. Language offers one of the clearest clues. Austronesian languages eventually spread across an extraordinary distance from Madagascar in the western Indian Ocean to Rapa Nui in the eastern Pacific. Their vocabulary preserves traces of the society that carries them. Reconstructed ancestral words refer to boats, sails, paddles, outriggers, winds, fishing, cultivated plants, houses, and kinship. These words suggest communities already deeply familiar with maritime movement before the greatest ocean crossings begin. A language cannot prove the design of a vanished canoe, but it can reveal what its speakers consider important enough to name with precision. The vessels used in island Southeast Asia are almost entirely lost because wood and fibre decay quickly in tropical environments. Their absence from the archaeological record once encouraged outsiders to underestimate ancient seafaring. Yet boat-building traditions preserved in later centuries show technologies of remarkable sophistication. Hulls can be carved from large logs and expanded with additional planks. Boards are joined without heavy iron nails using wooden pegs, internal lugs and lashings made from plant fibre. Flexible connections allow a vessel to absorb the force of waves rather than resist them rigidly. Outriggers stabilize narrow hulls, while double canoe arrangements create broad platforms capable of carrying people, animals, containers, tools, and plants. These craft are not primitive versions of European ships. They are solutions designed for different waters, materials, and purposes. A light outrigger can move quickly across reefs and lagoons. A larger sailing canoe can carry families between islands. Lashings can be repaired with local fibres. Shallow hulls can approach beaches where deep-keeled vessels cannot. The design grows from generations of testing and failure, has consequences severe enough to refine tradition with ruthless efficiency. The forest is therefore part of the maritime system. Boat builders need trees of the correct size and grain. They must understand how timber behaves when carved, dried, bent, soaked, and struck by waves. Certain woods are preferred for hulls, others for paddles, booms, masts, or pegs. Sap and resin help seal joints. Coconut fibre becomes cordage. Leaves and woven mats become sails or coverings. Stone adzes must be sharpened carefully enough to shape large hulls with repeated blows. A canoe begins inland in the selection of a tree, and its creation may involve ritual as well as engineering because the survival of the crew depends upon invisible flaws not being left in the wood. Agriculture also travels with these communities. Rice is important in some western regions, but as people move eastward, other crops become increasingly suited to island environments. Taro yam, banana, breadfruit, coconut, and sugar cane form part of a portable system of survival. Dogs, pigs, and chickens accompany some migrations, though not always together, and not always at the same time. The ability to carry food-producing species changes the nature of exploration. Voyagers are no longer limited to finding places where familiar wild resources already exist. They can recreate parts of their homeland on new shores. This does not mean every island welcomes cultivation. Soils differ. Rainfall varies sharply. Cyclones can destroy orchards. Salt spray can poison gardens. Rats hidden aboard can consume stores and later transform island ecosystems. Pigs may damage planted ground. A crop that thrives on one island may fail on another. Maritime expansion therefore requires experimentation after arrival, as much as skill during the voyage. Settlers observe slopes, freshwater sunlight, wind exposure, and volcanic soil. They learn which plants survive drought and which must be protected in wet valleys. One lesser-known feature of this world is the importance of social organization. A seaworthy canoe alone does not create expansion. Someone must organize labor to build it, gather provisions, select passengers, preserve seed stock, and decide when the weather is favorable. Navigators require training. Skilled builders must pass knowledge across generations. Families must agree to leave. Leaders may gain prestige through successful voyages, but they also risk blame if people disappear. The ocean tests not only technology but trust. The evidence remains incomplete because many early coastal settlements now lie underwater or beneath later habitation. Archaeologists often work with fragments, pottery styles, stone tools, food remains, burial practices, and the distribution of domesticated species. From these pieces a pattern emerges. Communities with new combinations of farming, pottery exchange, and boat technology move through the Philippines, eastern Indonesia, and the islands approaching New Guinea. Their routes are not straight lines. Some groups settle permanently, others maintain contact across channels. Technologies change as they encounter local traditions. What survives in the record suggests that maritime knowledge does not belong exclusively to the newcomers. Earlier inhabitants of the region already possessed deep experience with local seas, reefs, currents, and island ecologies. The expansion that follows is therefore the product of blending. Austronesian-speaking voyagers bring languages, crops, vessel forms, and social systems, while Papuan and other indigenous communities contribute knowledge rooted in much older occupation. Genes, tools, and words all record this meeting, though never in identical ways. From this crowded island world, the Pacific does not appear as one enormous leap into emptiness. It appears as a sequence of possible passages. One channel leads to another. Each voyage extends the edge of experience. Each settlement becomes a new point of departure. Beyond the familiar routes, the islands grow farther apart and the sea begins to demand longer commitments. The communities approaching New Guinea and the Bismarck archipelago carry with them more than boats. They carry a flexible culture of adaptation, one formed by centuries of moving through landscapes where land and water can never be separated. As these voyaging communities move into the islands around New Guinea and the Bismarck archipelago, the story becomes more complicated than a simple eastward march. They're entering a region known to archaeologists as Near Oceania, a vast maritime zone that has already been inhabited for tens of thousands of years. Its people are not isolated or technologically static. They have their own networks of exchange, their own fishing traditions, their own knowledge of reefs, forests, volcanoes, and seasonal winds. The newcomers do not arrive at the edge of an empty world. They arrive in one of the oldest human landscapes beyond Africa, where every usable shore already carries memory. New Guinea itself is immense, mountainous, and environmentally varied. Its interior contains high valleys where agriculture develops independently thousands of years before the Austronesian expansion reaches nearby coasts. In the lowlands and offshore islands, people rely on sago fishing, hunting, tree crops, and local forms of cultivation. To the east lie the Bismarck archipelago and the Solomon Islands, inhabited by communities whose ancestors crossed significant stretches of sea during the late Ice Age. These earlier voyages may have been shorter than the crossings later made into remote Oceania, yet they prove that maritime adaptation in the region has deep roots. When Austronesian-speaking groups enter this world, probably during the second millennium before the Common Era, they bring new combinations of pottery domesticated animals, cultivated plants and sailing technologies. Yet the archaeological and genetic record does not show a clean replacement of existing populations. Instead, it reveals contact that varies from island to island. In some places, incoming communities may establish settlements on previously unused coastal ground. Elsewhere, they live beside older populations, exchange goods, marry locally, and gradually blend. The result is a cultural frontier that remains dynamic for centuries. Genes preserve part of this encounter. Many populations across Oceania carry ancestry connected both to Austronesian-speaking migrants from East Asia and to Papuan-related peoples whose roots in the region are much older. The proportions differ widely. Some island groups retain a stronger Papuan genetic contribution, while others show more ancestry associated with later Austronesian movements. These patterns do not represent one moment of mixing. They reflect repeated contacts, separations, migrations, and local histories that cannot be reduced to a single voyage. Language tells a related but not identical story. Austronesian languages become dominant across much of the Pacific, yet many preserve words borrowed from Papuan languages. Vocabulary, connected to plants, animals, tools, or local practices, may record knowledge acquired from the people already living in near Oceania. At the same time, Papuan-speaking communities adopt Austronesian terms linked to boats trade or introduced crops. Language spreads through social relationships as much as population movement. A community can change its language without losing all of its ancestry, just as it can adopt new technologies while preserving older traditions. One surprising detail is that some of the biological adaptations useful in Pacific environments may travel through these encounters. Populations with long histories in New Guinea and nearby islands possess immune responses shaped by tropical diseases including malaria. New arrivals from regions with different disease environments face serious risks. Intermarriage does more than join families or alliances. It may also introduce genetic traits that improve survival in local conditions, although scholars still debate the timing and importance of particular adaptations. Disease rarely leaves a clear archaeological signature, but it can influence who survives where settlements endure and which communities expand. Food systems also become mixed. Austronesian migrants may arrive with pigs, chickens, dogs, and cultivated plants, but the species do not spread uniformly. Some animals disappear from particular islands after introduction. Others are exchanged onward through local networks. New Guinea contributes crops and knowledge of plants already adapted to wet tropical conditions. Bananas, taro yams, and tree crops have complicated histories involving several regions, repeated domestication, and long-distance transport. The canoe becomes a vessel not only for people, but for entire ecological packages assembled from different cultural sources. Obsidian offers one of the clearest signs of exchange. This dark volcanic glass can be shaped into extremely sharp cutting tools, and its chemical composition allows archaeologists to identify the source from which a fragment was taken. Pieces found far from their geological origins show that people are transporting valuable materials between islands over considerable distances. Some obsidian networks in the Bismarck region predate the arrival of Austronesian-speaking communities by thousands of years. The newcomers therefore enter trade routes that already exist, then expand or reorganize them. Pottery, by contrast, becomes one of the most visible markers of change. Earlier inhabitants of many parts of Near Oceania use stone, shell, bonewood and fibre, but pottery appears unevenly. When distinctive decorated ceramics begin spreading through the Bismarcks, they provide archaeologists with a durable trail that is easier to follow than boats or spoken languages. Yet even pottery cannot identify ethnicity with certainty. A vessel may be made by migrants copied by neighbours traded across the sea or produced by communities of mixed ancestry. Objects travel more easily than identities. Daily life in these contact zones is likely practical before it is dramatic. People visit neighbouring settlements. They exchange spouses, shell ornaments, stone food, and information. A navigator learns the location of a freshwater spring from someone whose ancestors have known it for generations. A farmer receives a crop variety suited to a particular soil. A boat builder observes a local technique for handling rough reefs. Conflict almost certainly occurs as well. Resources, prestige, and access to trade can produce rivalry. Yet permanent expansion across the region depends more upon cooperation and absorbed knowledge than endless conquest. The geography itself encourages this pattern. Near Oceania contains large islands visible from considerable distances, but also dangerous passages, strong currents, and coastlines broken by reefs. Local knowledge matters enormously. A newcomer may know how to sail, yet still lack an understanding of a particular channel where currents reverse with the tide or waves break over hidden coral. People already living there possess the finer map. Successful migrants must learn not just the broad direction of travel, but the intimate behaviour of each place. No single explanation fully accounts for the balance between migration and cultural exchange. Archaeological sites are incomplete. Ancient DNA survives poorly in tropical climates, and modern populations have continued moving long after the first encounters. Still, the surviving evidence points toward a braided history. The seafarers moving eastward are transformed by the people they meet. Their descendants carry Papuan ancestry, borrowed words, regional crops, and technologies shaped by many hands. This blending becomes essential when voyagers finally move beyond the older inhabited world. Near Oceania serves as both a meeting ground and a training ground. Here, navigation becomes more ambitious, communities become more culturally mixed, and the portable society needed for true ocean colonization takes clearer form. Then, in the Bismarck archipelago, a distinctive archaeological pattern begins to appear, one marked by intricately decorated pottery and settlements positioned along the sea. It is the trail later called Lapita, and it leads toward islands no human beings have ever reached before. The trail later called Lapita does not announce itself with ruined palaces, carved monuments, or written names. It appears instead in fragments scattered through coastal soil, pieces of pottery stamped with intricate geometric designs, stone tools carried far from their sources, shells shaped into ornaments, and the remains of meals eaten beside lagoons more than 3,000 years ago. These objects mark one of the most consequential movements in human prehistory. From the Bismarck archipelago, communities begin moving eastward through islands already inhabited for millennia, then beyond them into waters where no permanent human settlement has yet existed. In only a few centuries, their descendants establish communities across a zone stretching toward Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. The word Lapita comes from an archaeological site in New Caledonia, though the name itself is the result of an early misunderstanding of a local place name. It now describes a broad cultural tradition rather than one tribe kingdom or unified people. Lapita communities share recognizable pottery styles, maritime practices, exchange networks, and forms of settlement, but they are not identical everywhere. Their ancestry is already mixed, shaped by the encounters between incoming Austronesian-speaking populations and the older peoples of near Oceania. As they move eastward, that mixture continues to change. The most famous Lapita pottery is decorated by pressing tooth tools into wet clay before firing. The resulting patterns form bands of triangles, curves, circles, faces, and interlocking shapes. Some designs are extremely elaborate, covering vessels that may have been used for serving food ritual gatherings or displays of status. Archaeologists still debate the precise meanings of the patterns. They may represent clan identities, ancestral imagery, textiles, tattoos, or visual traditions whose symbolism has been lost. What is clear is that the pottery is not merely practical. It carries information. Because pottery breaks easily, but survives chemically and physically in the ground, it becomes the most visible guide to Lapita expansion. Sherds from different sites can be compared by decoration, clay composition, vessel form, and date. The earliest known Lapita sites appear in the Bismarck archipelago around the middle of the second millennium before the Common Era. From there, related traditions spread rapidly southeast through the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. The speed is remarkable. Distances that seem immense on a modern map are crossed by people working without written charts, centralized states or large fleets supported by imperial treasuries. Their settlements are usually tied closely to the sea. Many are built on beaches, small islands, lagoon edges, or coastal flats, with access to reefs and canoe routes. In some places, houses may have stood on posts over shallow water or tidal ground. This placement gives communities immediate access to fishing, shellfish gathering, transport, and exchange, while also reducing contact with inland disease environments or established populations. It allows a canoe arriving from another island to become part of the settlement's daily life rather than an exceptional visitor. The shoreline, however, is unstable. Storms rearrange beaches, rivers bury camps beneath sediment, and rising seas drown low coastal sites. Some Lapita settlements that once stood safely above water now lie partly submerged. This loss distorts the surviving record. Inland camps may be easier to preserve in certain places, while the coastal sites most central to maritime life disappear. The evidence remains incomplete, and archaeologists are often reconstructing a seafaring culture from the fraction of its world that escaped erosion. What survives suggests that Lapita communities are not simply wandering explorers. They arrive prepared to establish homes. Their sites contain ovens, hearths, post holes, pottery-making debris, stone adzes, shell tools, fish bones, and the remains of cultivated or transported species. They clear vegetation, plant gardens, exploit reefs, and build houses. Pigs, chickens, and dogs travel with some groups, although their distribution is uneven, and several disappear from particular island sequences. Rats also accompany the settlers, probably unintentionally leaving a biological signature of human arrival across islands that previously lacked terrestrial mammals. The landscape changes quickly after settlement. Birds that have evolved without human predators are especially vulnerable. Large flightless species nesting seabirds and ground-dwelling birds can be captured with little difficulty. Their bones appear in early occupation layers, sometimes in great quantities, then decline or vanish. Forests are burned to make room for gardens. Shellfish populations near settlements become smaller as harvesting intensifies. The arrival of a few canoe crews can begin an ecological transformation that unfolds over generations, yet Lapita survival does not depend on hunting alone. The settlers carry a flexible economy suited to uncertain islands. Reefs provide fish, turtles, and shellfish. Gardens supply taro yam, banana, and other crops where conditions allow. Trees offer fruit, timber, fiber, and shade. Stored foods help communities survive storms or poor seasons. Exchange connects settlements to resources unavailable locally. A small island lacking good stone may receive adzes from a volcanic source, hundreds of kilometers away. Shell ornaments travel in the opposite direction. Pottery can be traded, though in many places it is also made locally. Chemical analysis of obsidian reveals the scale of these connections. Volcanic glass from sources in the Bismarck archipelago appears far to the east, transported across long chains of islands. Not every object travels the entire distance in one canoe. Materials may pass through many hands, moving from community to community, along routes maintained by kinship and obligation. A piece of stone therefore records more than trade. It shows that newly settled islands are not immediately cut off from the world behind them. The rapid movement toward remote Oceania raises an important question. Are these islands found through deliberate exploration, accidental drift, or some combination of both? Storms certainly push canoes away from planned routes, and chance landfalls must occur. But accidental drift alone cannot explain the pattern. The settlements are too widely distributed, too organized, and too closely linked through shared cultural traditions. Voyagers appear to make reconnaissance journeys, return with information, and later transport larger groups equipped for settlement. Scholars still debate how frequently return voyages occur, but the evidence points toward planned expansion rather than a series of helpless accidents. The geography changes sharply east of the main Solomon Islands. In near Oceania, many islands are large, mountainous, and visible from one another under favourable conditions. Beyond them lies remote Oceania, where gaps widen and targets become smaller. The voyage to islands such as Vanuatu or Fiji demands longer periods beyond sight of land. The old method of extending familiar routes still works, but every extension carries greater risk. Water must last longer. Weather becomes more important. A mist island can mean open sea for days. Lapita expansion eventually reaches Tonga and Samoa, where communities establish the western foundations of what will later become Polynesian culture. The pottery tradition gradually changes. Elaborate decoration becomes less common in many regions, and on some islands pottery disappears entirely centuries later. Yet the social and maritime systems carried eastward do not vanish with the stamped designs. They develop locally, separating into new languages, identity, and traditions. The Lapita Trail is therefore both visible and deceptive. It gives archaeology a line across the ocean, but the line is not the journey itself. Pottery cannot show the anxiety of a crew watching clouds form at dusk, the smell of land after days at sea, or the moment a forested ridge first rises above the horizon. It cannot preserve the names of navigators or the reasons families leave one island for another. It only proves that they did. Behind every decorated sherd lies a canoe capable of carrying people across open water. Behind every new settlement lies a decision to trust that vessel with children, food plants, tools, and the future of a community. The pottery marks where the voyagers arrive. To understand how they cross the widening emptiness between those places, the story must turn from what survives in the ground to the vanished machines that carry them there. The vessels that carry Lapita communities into remote Oceania have almost entirely vanished. Tropical water destroys wood, salt weakens fibre, and insects consume what storms leave behind. Archaeologists recover stone adzes used to shape hulls, shell scrapers, fragments of cordage in rare, protected contexts, and occasional traces of canoe-related structures, but the canoes themselves are usually gone. Their absence creates a strange imbalance. One of the greatest expansions in human history is clearly visible across islands, yet the machines that make it possible survive mainly through later traditions, linguistic reconstruction, experimental voyages, and careful inference. These vessels are often described too casually as simple canoes. The word can suggest something small, fragile, and suited only to calm water near shore. Ocean-going Pacific craft can be none of those things. Some are large enough to carry dozens of people along with water containers, food tools, plants, animals, mats, fishing gear, and the materials needed to repair damage at sea. Their forms vary across regions and centuries, but several basic solutions appear repeatedly: narrow hulls designed to move efficiently through water outriggers that resist capsizing, double-hulled arrangements that create stable platforms and sails able to convert shifting winds into forward movement. A double canoe joins two long hulls with crossbeams and a platform. The design distributes weight across a broad base without requiring one massive body of timber. It offers stability in ocean swells and creates usable space between the hulls where cargo and passengers can be kept above spray. An outrigger canoe uses a smaller float connected to the main hull by booms. This prevents the vessel from rolling too easily, while preserving speed and maneuverability. Both systems reflect the same underlying understanding. Stability does not have to come from a deep, heavy hull. It can be created by widening the vessel's effective footprint across the sea. The joints matter as much as the shape. European observers accustomed to nails and rigid frames once misunderstood lashed construction as crude. In reality, lashings can allow a vessel to flex under the force of waves. A hull that is too stiff may crack when lifted unevenly by swells. A carefully bound canoe absorbs movement through its connections. Wooden pegs, carved lugs, coconut fibre rope, and plant-based caulking work together as an integrated system. Each lashing can be inspected and replaced. Damage thus would require a shipyard in another tradition may be repaired on a beach with locally available material. Building such a vessel demands enormous skill. A tree must be selected for length, straightness, strength, and resistance to rot. Felling it with stone tools requires coordination and patience. The trunk may be hollowed by controlled cutting and burning, then shaped with adzes whose polished edges must be repeatedly sharpened. Additional planks can raise the sides of the hull. Builders judge symmetry by eye and touch, knowing that small irregularities will affect balance. The work may involve many households because the labour exceeds what one family can easily provide. The sail transforms the range of the canoe. Early Pacific rigs are likely made from woven plant material, perhaps pandanus leaves, or other fibres prepared into panels and joined together. Their exact ancient forms remain uncertain, because almost nothing survives. Later, oceanic traditions use triangular or claw-shaped sails capable of efficient movement across or partly against the wind. Scholars still debate how closely these later rigs resemble those of Lapita Voyagers, but the broad principle is clear. Wind power allows crews to travel farther and carry more than paddling alone would permit. Paddles remain essential. They maneuver the vessel through reefs, help during calm weather, and provide control during departures and landings. Steering may depend on large paddles held from the stern rather than a fixed rudder. The crew must work with precise timing when waves approach a beach or narrow channel. A voyage can fail in its final minutes if the canoe strikes coral after surviving hundreds of kilometers of open sea. Offshore navigation attracts the greatest attention, yet coastal handling is often the most immediately dangerous part of the journey. Cargo must be arranged with equal care. Too much weight in one hull can make a double canoe unstable. Water containers must be secured against rolling and protected from contamination by salt spray. Food must remain dry. Seed tubers and cuttings cannot be crushed beneath heavier equipment. Pigs or dogs, when carried, create additional problems of feeding waste and movement. Passengers need space to rest without interfering with the crew. The canoe becomes a floating settlement compressed into a few meters of wood and rope. Fresh water is the strictest limit. People can survive with restricted food longer than they can survive without water, especially beneath tropical sun and salt-laden wind. Voyagers may carry water in gourds, bamboo sections, wooden containers, or other vessels sealed and tied in place. Coconut liquid provides some hydration while foods with high moisture content reduce demand. Rain can replenish supplies if crews are prepared to catch it with mats or leaves. Yet rainfall is uncertain, and a leaking container can become a disaster long before anyone sees land. Fire presents another challenge. Settlers need it after arrival for cooking, clearing vegetation, warmth and tool-making. Embers may be carried in protected material, though fire can also be recreated with friction tools if dry fuel survives the crossing. Fishing gear allows crews to supplement provisions, but catching fish cannot be guaranteed. Hooks, lines, lures and nets occupy little space, making them valuable insurance rather than a complete plan. The human composition of the crew is deliberate. A reconnaissance voyage may involve experienced navigators and sailors, while a settlement expedition must carry a socially viable group. Builders, gardeners, fishers, healers, and people knowledgeable about plants all contribute to survival. Children may travel because the goal is not merely to reach land but to establish continuity. The presence of families turns a voyage from an adventure into a transfer of society. No written record describes the selection process, and the evidence remains incomplete. Some journeys may be organized by powerful leaders seeking land or prestige. Others may respond to conflict, population pressure, drought storms, or the attraction of opportunity. Canoes can also maintain existing alliances, carrying marriage partners and gifts between communities. The same vessel that explores an unknown horizon may later travel a familiar route as part of an established network. Experimental reconstructions have shown that traditionally inspired canoes can cross great distances safely when handled by skilled crews. These modern voyages do not prove every detail of ancient practice, but they expose the weakness of older assumptions that Pacific settlement must result mainly from accidental drifting. A well-built canoe is capable of purposeful travel. More importantly, it can return. Exploration becomes far more effective when navigators sail outward under conditions that make a homeward course possible if no land is found. The canoe therefore represents a concentration of knowledge: forest ecology, stoneworking, fiber technology, weather observation, social organization, food storage and navigation, all meet in its construction. Remove any one of these systems and long-distance settlement becomes more dangerous. Combine them and an apparently empty horizon becomes a route. Still, the vessel alone cannot find an island. Even the strongest hull can carry its passengers past land without ever revealing how close they came. The final instrument is the navigator standing amid wind and spray reading patterns, almost invisible to the untrained eye. The canoe makes the voyage physically possible. The navigator gives the ocean direction. The navigator does not command the sea, he listens to it. Standing near the center or stern of the canoe, he watches the horizon, feels the rhythm beneath the hull, and measures direction through signs that most passengers barely notice. The ocean offers no roads, but it is never blank. It carries patterns written in stars, wind swells, clouds, birds, light, and the behavior of living things. To cross the Pacific deliberately is to understand how these signs overlap, how one confirms another, and how uncertainty can be managed when every familiar landmark has disappeared. At night, the stars provide the clearest framework. Different stars rise and set at predictable points along the horizon, creating a natural compass that changes through the seasons. A navigator memorizes the paths of important stars and knows which ones guide a canoe toward a particular island or region. The vessel may be kept on a course by steering toward a star as it rises, then shifting to another when the first climbs too high or disappears. The sky becomes a sequence of directional markers rather than a static display. This knowledge cannot be reduced to simply following one bright star. The navigator must understand the movement of the entire sky. He learns which stars appear during different months, how their positions change through the night, and which celestial patterns remain useful at different latitudes. Near the equator, some stars rise steeply and vanish quickly. Farther north or south, their paths alter. A voyage across a large distance therefore requires a mental map of a moving heavens. Clouds can erase that map without warning. Tropical nights often shift from clear to overcast, and storms may hide the sky for days. Navigation does not stop when the stars vanish. The navigator turns to the swell, the long rolling movement created by distant winds and storms. Unlike the smaller waves whipped up by local weather major swells, can travel across vast reaches of ocean while maintaining a recognizable direction. A skilled navigator feels them through the canoe's motion, sometimes while lying down or resting a hand against the hull. Several swells may cross one another at the same time. One may come from a distant storm, another from seasonal trade winds, and a third from weather closer to the canoe. To an inexperienced passenger, the movement seems chaotic. To the navigator, it contains structure. He identifies the dominant swell and remembers its angle relative to the intended course. Even after darkness or cloud removes every visual reference, the canoe's rise-fall and sideways roll can reveal whether it is still moving correctly. Wind adds another layer. The trade winds blow with enough regularity across much of the Pacific to make seasonal travel possible, but they are not perfectly constant. Their direction shifts with weather systems, island topography, and time of year. Navigators learn when a voyage is most likely to succeed and when contrary winds make departure unwise. They also understand that the most convenient outward wind may not allow an easy return. Exploration is safer when crews can sail into or across the prevailing wind, preserving the possibility of turning back with a following breeze. This may help explain why settlement does not proceed evenly in all directions. Geography alone is not enough. An island may lie relatively close yet remain difficult to reach, because winds and currents oppose the route. Another farther away may be accessible along a more reliable sailing corridor. The Pacific expansion follows not only chains of land but invisible highways created by climate. Daylight provides signs unavailable at night. Clouds often form over islands as moist air rises across warm land or mountain slopes. A stationary cluster of clouds on the horizon can indicate land below, even when the island itself remains hidden. The underside of clouds may reflect the green of vegetation or the pale colour of a lagoon. In shallow tropical waters, sunlight reflected from reefs can create a distinctive brightness in the sky. These signals are subtle, easily confused with ordinary weather, but experienced crews know when several clues begin pointing toward the same place. Birds are among the most useful guides near land. Some seabirds remain far offshore for long periods, while others feed at sea during the day and return to nests on land at night. Their direction of flight changes with the hour. A bird flying outward after dawn may indicate that land lies behind it. The same species returning in the evening may lead directly toward an island. Navigators learn which birds are reliable and how far each commonly travels from shore. One lesser-known method involves carrying certain birds aboard and releasing them when land is suspected. A bird that circles and returns to the canoe may have found nowhere to rest. One that flies purposefully away may be heading toward land. Accounts from different maritime cultures describe variations of this practice, though the archaeological evidence is naturally absent. What survives in the record suggests that birds are not mystical compasses, but living instruments understood through close observation. Marine life also changes near islands. Schools of fish may gather around reefs. Turtles, insects leave seeds, driftwood, and floating vegetation can signal proximity to land. The smell of soil smoke or flowers sometimes travels beyond the visible shore, especially after rain or at certain times of day. Watercolor shifts as depth decreases, or currents carry sediment from lagoons. Waves behave differently when they pass around submerged reefs or bend around an island. This bending of waves is especially important. An island disrupts the ocean's swell, creating reflected or refracted patterns that can be detected beyond sight of land. Navigators may recognize a change in the rhythm beneath the canoe and infer not only that land is nearby but where it lies. Scholars still debate how far such signals can be read reliably, and how ancient methods vary across island groups. The evidence remains incomplete because this expertise is practical, embodied, and difficult to describe outside the language in which it is taught. Memory holds all these signs together. Traditional navigators do not necessarily imagine themselves travelling across a fixed grid. In some systems, the canoe is treated as remaining conceptually at the centre, while islands, stars, and sea marks move around it. The navigator tracks the vessel's progress by remembering speed direction, elapsed time, and each change of course. This process resembles dead reckoning, but it is enriched by constant environmental correction. The mind contains an expanding map that must be updated through every hour of the voyage. Training begins long before a person leads a canoe into open sea. Students memorize star sequences, island bearings, seasonal winds, bird behavior, and names for different swells. They may practice by observing from shore, making shorter inter-island journeys, and reciting routes under the guidance of experts. Knowledge can be protected within particular families or specialist groups because successful navigation brings prestige and influence. A navigator holds the safety of the crew, but also the survival of accumulated memory. Errors are unavoidable. Clouds can be misleading. Currents push the canoe sideways. Fatigue affects judgment. Storms force unplanned changes. A navigator may reach the expected latitude of an island but miss it to the east or west. One strategy is to aim deliberately to one side, then turn along an imagined line until land is found. Another is to search for an island group rather than a single tiny target. The presence of several islands, reefs, bird colonies, and cloud formations creates a wider zone of detection than the land itself. No single technique fully accounts for every successful crossing. Pacific navigation is powerful because it combines imperfect signs into one coherent system. Stars give direction, swells preserve it, winds determine opportunity, birds narrow the search, and clouds reveal what remains below the horizon. The navigator rarely receives certainty. Instead, he builds confidence from convergence. By the time a dark line of forest finally appears above the sea, the island has often been detected many hours earlier through smaller signs. Landfall is not a sudden miracle. It is the final confirmation of a chain of observations. Yet reaching shore solves only the first problem. A new island may have no reliable freshwater poor soil, violent surf or plants, unfamiliar to the arrivals. To settle it, the Voyagers must bring more than navigational skill. They must carry the means to rebuild an entire human world. A canoe approaching an uninhabited island carries more than passengers. It carries a compressed version of society. Beneath woven coverings and between the lashed beams lie the materials needed to turn unfamiliar ground into a place where human life can continue. Stone adzes, digging, sticks, fishing hooks, cordage food stores, containers, fire-making tools, plant cuttings, seed tubers, and sometimes animals restless from days at sea. The success of the voyage is measured not only by whether the crew reaches land, but by whether the living cargo survives long enough to take root. The first sight of an island can be deceptive. A green mountain rising from the ocean appears abundant, yet tropical landscapes do not automatically provide familiar food. Some islands contain few edible plants. Others lack large land animals entirely. Freshwater may be hidden in caves trapped in volcanic rock or available only after rain. A lagoon rich in fish can still be surrounded by soil too thin for dependable gardens. The settlers therefore arrive carrying solutions developed across generations of earlier movement. Taro is among the most important. Its starchy underground corm can feed communities reliably, where rainfall is sufficient, while different varieties tolerate wet pits, shaded valleys, or irrigated ground. Yams provide another durable source of carbohydrate, though they require careful planting and knowledge of seasonal growth. Bananas can be propagated from shoots rather than seeds, allowing desirable varieties to be reproduced. Breadfruit trees eventually produce large quantities of food with relatively little daily labor, but they take time to mature. Coconut palms provide drink, flesh oil, fiber timber, and containers, making them almost ideal companions for island settlement. Not every plant travels as a bag of seed. Many Pacific crops are propagated through cutting, shoots, corms, or tubers. These living pieces must be protected from saltwater crushing heat and drying wind. A successful voyage may depend on someone checking damp wrappings during the crossing, shading young shoots, and separating food intended for eating from plants reserved for cultivation. Hunger creates a dangerous temptation. The last viable yam tuber can feed a few people today, or become the beginning of a field that feeds descendants. The settlers must also understand that one crop is never enough. Cyclones flatten banana stands, drought damages taro, saltwater intrusion ruins low gardens, pests spread quickly through small plots, a mixed system offers resilience. Fast-growing crops supply early food while slower trees establish themselves. Dryland gardens support communities when swamp cultivation fails. Fishing shellfish, gathering bird hunting and reef collecting reduce pressure on planted food during the first difficult months. Animals create both opportunity and risk. Pigs provide meat status and value in ceremony, but they consume food, disturb gardens, and reproduce only if enough survive the crossing. Chickens are easier to carry and can live on scraps, insects, and scattered grain. Dogs assist with hunting and may hold social or ritual importance. Their distribution across the Pacific is uneven, suggesting that particular voyages lose animals, choose not to carry them, or fail to maintain breeding populations after arrival. The most successful stowaway is the Pacific rat. It hides in cargo nests within canoe structures and survives on stored food. On islands where no comparable land mammal exists, it spreads rapidly. Rats eat seeds, eggs, insects, fruit, and young plants. Their bones and gnaw marks later become useful evidence for archaeologists trying to date human arrival. Yet for the settlers, they are competitors that cannot easily be removed. The same canoe that brings crops and companions also carries the beginnings of ecological disruption. Landing is followed by immediate calculation. The newcomers search for drinkable water-sheltered ground reef access timber and soil that can be worked. A protected bay is useful, but if it faces the wrong seasonal winds, it may become dangerous months later. High ground offers safety from waves, but increases the labor of carrying water. A river mouth may provide fertile land while exposing the settlement to flooding and mosquitoes. The first camp is rarely chosen by beauty alone. Fire changes the island quickly. Small clearings are burned to remove undergrowth, release nutrients, and prepare garden plots. Smoke keeps insects away and preserves food. Charcoal becomes one of the most durable traces of settlement, accumulating in soil, where natural fire may once have been rare. Pollen records often show vegetation changing after human arrival, as forest species decline and grasses, weeds, or cultivated plants spread. Early settlers exploit animals that have never learned to fear humans. Ground nesting birds can be caught easily. turtles returning to beaches provide meat and eggs. Shellfish are gathered from shallow water in enormous numbers. Large species may seem inexhaustible during the first generation, but island ecosystems are limited. A colony of birds that survives thousands of years without mammalian predators can collapse rapidly once people, dogs, pigs and rats arrive together. This abundance creates what archaeologists sometimes call an early harvest phase, when the first settlers consume unusually large animals and rich resources close to shore. Later layers at the same sites contain smaller fish, fewer large birds and evidence of more intensive gardening. The change does not necessarily mean the settlers are careless. They may not understand how slowly some island species reproduce. Knowledge carried from another environment cannot predict every consequence in a new one. Social survival is just as delicate as ecological survival. A founding group must contain enough people to maintain families, share labor, resolve conflict, and preserve specialized knowledge. Too few skilled gardeners or navigators can leave the settlement vulnerable. Illness or accident may remove the only person who knows how to repair a particular sail or prepare a medicinal plant. Communities therefore depend on overlapping expertise, not one indispensable individual. Kinship binds the new settlement to the homeland. If return voyages remain possible, relatives can bring spouses, tools, animals, and replacement crops. Marriage across islands reduces isolation and renews alliances. Valuable stone shell ornaments and ceremonial goods move through these relationships. A new island is not immediately a separate world. It begins as an extension of an older network joined by canoes crossing routes that become more familiar with repetition. Yet distance changes these ties. A storm season may interrupt travel for months. A homeland settlement may decline or move. Navigation knowledge can be lost. Languages begin to diverge as children grow up hearing new pronunciations and local terms. Crops adapt to different soils. Rituals shift around new landscapes. Within generations, the transplanted society becomes something that never existed on the island of origin. The evidence remains incomplete because the first gardens, houses, and canoe shelters are fragile. Archaeologists often infer transported landscapes from starch grains, plant impressions, pollen animal bones, and changes in sediment. What survives suggests careful planning rather than random colonization. Settlers arrive equipped not merely to endure but to reproduce a familiar way of life under unfamiliar conditions. Each successful landfall therefore creates another human island in the chain, another place from which canoes can depart. But east of Samoa and Tonga movement slows. For centuries communities deepen their roots, reshape their societies, and transform inherited traditions into something recognizably Polynesian. The ocean remains open before them, yet the next great leap does not come immediately. For generations after the Lapita Trail reaches Tonga and Samoa, the great eastward movement appears to slow. The canoes do not vanish and the sea does not become forbidden. People continue travelling among nearby islands, carrying spouses, tools, food stories, and obligations across familiar routes. Yet the enormous empty spaces farther east remain unsettled. Beyond the known archipelagos, the next islands lie at distances that demand longer voyages, narrower margins for error, and navigational confidence built through centuries of experience. This pause is not an abandonment of exploration. It is a period in which new societies take shape at the edge of the known world. Tonga and Samoa become more than remote outposts of Lapita expansion. They become homelands in their own right. Communities that once carry cultural traditions from the West begin adapting them to local landscapes, climates, and social realities. Pottery styles change. Elaborate stamped decoration becomes less common, and in Samoa, pottery production eventually declines before disappearing entirely. stone shell, wood, bark, cloth, and woven fibre become increasingly important, although most of these materials survive poorly in the archaeological record. What appears as silence in the soil may therefore conceal a period of intense cultural invention. The disappearance of pottery once encouraged the mistaken idea that communities become simpler or less capable. In reality, pottery may no longer be essential where wooden bowls, coconut containers, earth ovens, and leaf wrapping perform the same tasks. Clay vessels are heavy and fragile aboard canoes. A society adapted to maritime movement may prefer containers that can be repaired, replaced, or made from plants available across the islands. Archaeology often notices what endures, not necessarily what matters most to the people who use it. Languages begin to change as well. The ancestral speech carried eastward from the Lapita world gradually develops into Proto-Polynesian, the reconstructed parent language of the many Polynesian languages spoken later across the Central and Eastern Pacific. Words shift in sound and meaning. New terms develop for local species winds, social ranks, religious concepts, and forms of canoe travel. The language preserves older Austronesian foundations while absorbing the experience of generations born far from the Western Islands their ancestors once knew. This linguistic development suggests prolonged interaction among Tonga Samoa and neighbouring islands such as Uvea and Futuna. Canoes continue moving through what is sometimes described as the Western Polynesian homeland. The islands are separated by open water, but not by absolute isolation. Marriage alliances, exchange warfare, ritual obligations, and kinship keep communities connected. A person may belong to one island while tracing ancestry to another. Navigators maintain route knowledge, and shared traditions prevent the sea from becoming a cultural boundary. Social organization grows more complex. Population increases gradually as gardens expand and settlements spread. Families establish claims to land reef zones and productive tree groves. Leadership may become increasingly hereditary, tied to genealogy and control over labor. Chiefs organize feasts, canoe construction, warfare, and the distribution of valuable goods. Prestige depends partly on the ability to gather people and resources, which makes long-distance connections politically important as well as economically useful. In Tonga, these developments eventually produce one of the Pacific's most powerful regional political systems, though the famous Tongan maritime chiefdom belongs to a later period. Its deeper roots lie in the centuries when communities learned to coordinate labor across islands and maintain alliances over considerable distances. Monumental earthworks and stone structures appear much later, but the social capacity behind them develops slowly. The ocean encourages decentralization by separating communities, yet skilled leadership can use the same water to connect them. Daily life remains tied to cultivation and reef resources. Taro grows in wet ground while yams and other crops occupy drier plots. Breadfruit, coconut, banana, and pandanus provide food and materials. Fishing knowledge becomes increasingly specialized. Hooks are shaped for different prey. Nets are used in lagoons. Offshore fishermen follow seasonal movements of tuna and other pelagic species. Shell becomes ornament tool and symbol of status. The reef is not merely a place to collect food, but a mapped landscape of channels, spawning grounds, hazards, and inherited rights. Cyclones periodically undo years of work. Saltwater destroys gardens, roofs disappear, and breadfruit trees are stripped bare. Drought can be equally dangerous, especially on small islands without permanent streams. Communities respond through food preservation, crop diversity, reciprocal obligations, and movement between islands. A chief who distributes stored food after a storm strengthens authority. A family with relatives elsewhere possesses a form of insurance. Resilience is social as much as agricultural. The long pause also allows navigation to become embedded more deeply in cultural life. Routes are remembered through chants, genealogies, star names, and stories associated with particular islands. Canoe builders refine forms suitable for local winds and passages. Sailors learn which seasons favour westward or eastward travel. Children grow up in societies where distant islands are real places connected to named ancestors, not abstract possibilities beyond the horizon. Why then does settlement not continue immediately into central and eastern Polynesia? Scholars still debate the reasons. One possibility is that the remaining distances are simply much greater. From Samoa or Tonga, the nearest large island groups to the east may lie hundreds or more than 1,000 kilometres away, often against prevailing winds. Exploration becomes riskier and requires deliberate strategies for finding land that cannot be detected from neighbouring islands. Climate may also influence the timing. Wind patterns in the Pacific shift over centuries, creating periods when eastward travel becomes more or less favourable. Changes associated with the El Niño Southern Oscillation can temporarily weaken or reverse the usual trade winds. A sequence of unusual westerly winds may allow voyagers to sail eastward more easily, while the return journey follows restored easterlies. Researchers have explored whether such climatic windows help explain bursts of expansion, though no single explanation fully accounts for the timing. Population pressure may contribute, but it is unlikely to act alone. Islands do not need to become desperately overcrowded before people seek new land. Ambition, rivalry, exile, inheritance, disputes, marriage, curiosity, or the prestige of founding a new community may all encourage departure. Oral traditions from later Polynesian societies often remember voyages arising from conflict or the decisions of powerful leaders, though these accounts cannot always be linked directly to events many centuries earlier. The possibility of failed exploration must also be considered. Canoes may sail east and return without finding land. Others may disappear. A long archaeological pause does not prove that no one attempts the journey. It only shows that no lasting settlements have yet been identified. The ocean preserves almost nothing from voyages that end at sea. During these centuries, the people of Western Polynesia are changing biologically and culturally as well. Genetic evidence indicates continued contact with Papuan-related populations after the earliest Lapita expansion, although the timing and routes remain subjects of debate. The communities that later settle eastern Polynesia are therefore descendants of a long process of mixture adaptation and local development, rather than an untouched population frozen in time. By the end of the pause, the essential elements of Polynesian culture are firmly established: related languages, ranked societies, sophisticated horticulture, powerful kinship networks, ocean-going canoes, and navigation preserved through disciplined memory. The people of Tonga and Samoa no longer stand at the distant end of someone else's migration. They occupy the centre of a world they have made. Then the pattern changes. Canoes begin moving farther east into an ocean where islands are smaller, more widely scattered and invisible until the final stages of approach. The routes lead toward the Cook Islands, the Societies and the Marquesas. The centuries of consolidation give way to another rapid expansion, and the known Pacific begins to widen once more. The renewed expansion does not begin with one fleet leaving on a single heroic day. It unfolds through repeated departures, returns, discoveries, and settlements spread across generations. From the established communities of Western Polynesia, voyagers move into the central Pacific, where island groups lie far apart, and the routes between them cannot be learned by following coastlines. The Cook Islands, the Society Islands, the Marquesas, and the scattered atolls of the Tuamotus become stepping stones in a widening network. Each successful landfall adds another point to the mental map, another harbour from which crews can sail farther, and another community capable of sending people beyond the known horizon. The exact chronology remains debated because many early coastal sites have been disturbed by storms, erosion, later settlement and rising seas. Radiocarbon dates can shift as methods improve, and a single piece of charcoal may come from wood, already old when it is burned. Earlier estimates once placed some settlements much farther back in time, but increasingly precise dating suggests that large parts of eastern Polynesia are colonized rapidly, mostly during the final centuries of the first millennium and the early centuries of the second millennium of the Common Era. The expansion is late in human prehistory, but astonishingly fast in geographic scale. The Society Islands may become one of the major centres of this renewed movement. Their high volcanic mountains, fertile valleys, reefs and protected lagoons provide resources capable of supporting growing populations. Tahiti and neighbouring islands later become famous to outsiders, but long before European arrival they are connected to a larger seaborne world. Canoes move between islands carrying basalt tools, fine mats, feathers, shell ornaments, food and people. Navigators accumulate knowledge not only of individual destinations but of chains of islands arranged across broad regions. The Marquesas stand farther northeast, rising sharply from deep water. Their steep valleys and limited reef systems create conditions very different from the lagoons of the Societies. Settlers adapt quickly, concentrating gardens in fertile valleys and relying on tree crops, fishing and stored food. The islands become another important centre from which later voyages may depart. Linguistic relationships, artifact styles and genetic evidence reveal connections, though scholars still debate the direction and timing of particular movements. Farther south and west communities spread through the Cook Islands and related archipelagos. Some islands are high and volcanic, while others are low coral atolls barely visible above the sea. Atolls present a special challenge. Their soils are thin, fresh water is limited, and storms can wash across much of the land. Yet they also offer lagoons rich in fish, and shellfish coconut groves, seabird colonies, and positions along important routes. Settling them requires a refined understanding of water storage, pit cultivation, and the careful management of limited resources. The Tuamotu archipelago stretches across an immense area of the Central Pacific, with dozens of low atolls scattered like fragments across the sea. From the deck of a canoe, many are almost impossible to see until the vessel is close. They lack the cloud-crowned mountains that reveal high islands from a distance. Navigators searching for them depend upon bird flight, reflected lagoon light, altered swells, and the subtle green line of palms along the horizon. Missing one atoll can leave a canoe sailing into hundreds of kilometres of open water. These low islands may nevertheless act as bridges between larger archipelagos. A crew does not need to settle every reef permanently for it to become useful. An atoll can provide water, coconuts, fish, birds, and a temporary place to repair a canoe. Knowledge of such stopping points shortens the practical distance between major island groups. The Pacific is still vast, but it becomes divided into remembered passages. Purposeful exploration likely relies on more than simply sailing toward rumours. Voyagers may infer the existence of land from the routes of migratory birds, drifting vegetation, or the direction of swells. They may also recognise that island chains often continue beyond the last known shore. A canoe can sail outward for several days under winds that permit an easy return, gradually extending the search zone. When signs of land appear, the crew follows them. If nothing is found, it turns back before supplies become critical. Once an island is discovered, the first visitors may not remain. They can examine water sources, soils, reefs and landing places, then return home with information. A later voyage carries families, crops, tools and animals. This pattern is difficult to prove directly, because archaeology rarely distinguishes a brief reconnaissance visit from the first permanent settlement. Yet planned colonization better explains the carefully transported plants and socially viable communities found across eastern Polynesia. The expansion creates connections rather than immediate isolation. Newly settled islands maintain contact with their homelands through return voyages. Basalt adzes can be traced chemically to particular volcanic sources, showing that stone travels between distant islands. Some quarries gain regional importance because their rock produces strong, sharp tools. A single adze found far from its source may represent direct travel exchange through several islands, or an heirloom carried by a migrating family. One lesser-known example comes from fine-grained basalt transported across extraordinary distances. Stone from particular quarry zones appears on islands separated by hundreds, or even thousands of kilometers. These objects are not always ordinary tools. Some may serve as prestige goods, symbols of ancestry, or physical links to a homeland. A piece of stone carried across the sea can preserve social memory in a way that local material cannot. Languages also record the network. As communities separate their speech changes but related words for canoes, wind stars, crops, kinship, and ceremonial life reveal shared origins. Eastern Polynesian languages remain closely connected despite the vast spaces between their speakers. Their similarities suggest that expansion occurs over a relatively compressed period, followed by continued contact in some regions. Yet language alone cannot identify the exact route of every voyage, because people can move, intermarry, and adopt the speech of neighbouring groups. Oral traditions preserve memories of named islands. Ancestral navigators rival chiefs and founding voyages. These traditions are not simple chronicles frozen unchanged across centuries. They combine genealogy, politics, sacred meaning, and historical memory. Later generations may compress several migrations into one legendary journey, or connect a founding ancestor to a route used repeatedly. Even so, the stories often retain accurate geographic knowledge and a strong awareness that societies begin through purposeful travel. As settlement spreads, the idea of homeland becomes layered. An island first colonized from Samoa may later send settlers to another archipelago. That new community may eventually launch voyages of its own. Within a few generations, ancestry points through several islands rather than back to one origin. The migration is therefore not a straight arrow across the ocean. It resembles a branching tree whose limbs sometimes reconnect. Competition may accelerate movement. Growing populations increase demand for fertile valleys, fishing grounds, and political influence. Younger siblings in chiefly families may possess prestige but lack land. Defeated factions may choose departure over submission. Successful navigators can gain status by founding new settlements or restoring contact with distant relatives. Curiosity, ambition, and conflict all have places in the story, although no single motive explains every voyage. Environmental disruption may also push communities outward. Cyclones can devastate crops while prolonged drought weakens food systems. Volcanic eruptions affect certain islands, and local resource depletion makes new land attractive. Yet migration requires surplus as much as desperation. Starving communities cannot easily construct large canoes and provision them for long voyages. The expeditions most capable of success likely come from societies organized enough to invest labor in uncertain opportunities. What emerges across central and eastern Polynesia is a connected oceanic realm. Islands separated by enormous distances share related languages, agricultural traditions, religious concepts, social structures, and boat technologies. Local cultures become distinct, but they remain recognizable members of a larger family. The Pacific does not erase connection, it stretches it. From these central archipelagos, the remaining horizons lead toward the most distant corners of the Polynesian world. Far to the north lie volcanic islands beneath unfamiliar stars. Far to the east stands a lonely triangle of land near the edge of South America. Far to the southwest, cold forests and snow-covered mountains rise beyond temperate seas. Reaching them will push Pacific navigation into environments unlike anything encountered before. At the far edges of the Polynesian world, the ocean begins presenting extremes. To the north, high volcanic islands rise beneath unfamiliar skies. Far to the east, one small triangle of land stands alone in enormous emptiness. To the southwest, cold currents lead toward forests, mountains, snow, and long winter nights. Hawaii, Rapa Nui, and Aotearoa are not simply distant destinations. They test whether a culture formed in tropical archipelagos can survive when the sea carries it into radically different worlds. The Hawaiian Islands lie more than 3,000 kilometers from central Polynesia. Their mountains gather clouds and create streams, while volcanic soils can be exceptionally fertile. Yet the islands do not reveal themselves easily. A crew sailing north crosses the equator and enters a changing sky. Familiar stars shift lower or disappear while others gain importance. Swells and winds behave differently. The voyage demands a navigational system flexible enough to extend beyond patterns learned farther south. The first settlers probably arrived from central eastern Polynesia, perhaps from the Marquesas or neighbouring island groups, though scholars still debate the precise homeland chronology and number of migration waves. Later contact may connect Hawaii with the Society Islands. Language, genetics, oral tradition and material culture suggest deliberate settlement. The arrivals bring taro, sweet potato, yam, banana, sugarcane, breadfruit, coconut pigs, dogs, chickens, and the tools needed to reproduce a Polynesian economy. Hawaii offers abundance but unevenly. Rain falls heavily on windward slopes while leeward districts remain dry. Valleys support irrigated taro terraces while drier regions favour sweet potato. Settlers learn to read elevation, rainfall, lava age, and soil depth. They construct irrigation channels, fish ponds, and extensive dryland agricultural systems. Landscapes that appear wild to later outsiders are carefully managed territories shaped by labour inheritance and ecological knowledge. The island's size permits population growth beyond what many smaller archipelagos can support. Large valleys become political centres. Chiefs organise irrigation warfare ritual and tribute. Communities remain linked by coastal canoe routes, but the distances between islands produce regional identity and rivalries. The ocean voyage that first brings people to Hawaii eventually gives way to an internal maritime world where canoes carry goods, messengers and armies. Rapa Nui presents the opposite problem. It is small, remote, and surrounded by thousands of kilometres of open water. Its nearest inhabited neighbours lie far beyond the horizon, and once regular contact weakens, it becomes one of the most isolated human societies on Earth. Settlers probably arrived from eastern Polynesia during the late 1st or early 2nd millennium of the Common Era. The exact date remains debated because early sites are difficult to identify. The island they find is not the treeless grassland later visitors describe. Pollen and other environmental evidence indicate that Rapa Nui once supports palm forest shrubs, seabirds, and productive coastal waters. Settlers plant crops in volcanic soil and protect them from wind and evaporation using stone gardens, rock mulch, and sheltered enclosures. These techniques reveal a society adapting intelligently to drought and poor soil, rather than simply exhausting a paradise through ignorance. The famous moai emerge from this landscape. Carved from volcanic rock and raised on ceremonial platforms, they are connected to ancestors and community authority. Their construction requires quarrying, transport food, production coordination, and shared belief. Popular stories portray them as symbols of reckless competition that destroys the island's forests, but the evidence is more complicated. Deforestation is real, and land clearing, fire, and introduced rats all contribute. Yet no single explanation fully accounts for the transformation. Rapa Nui's isolation sharpens every ecological limit. Large timber becomes scarce. Seabird colonies decline. Gardens must conserve moisture. Still, the population survives for centuries before European contact brings disease, violence, slave raiding, and demographic collapse. The society encountered by outsiders is not merely the remnant of an ancient self-inflicted disaster. It is a living culture already tested by environmental change and later devastated by forces arriving from beyond its control. Aotearoa, known later as New Zealand, requires another transformation. It lies deep in the temperate south beyond environments where most Polynesian crops flourish. Settlement occurs relatively late, probably during the 13th century, through voyages from eastern Polynesia. The settlers cross cold, rough seas and reach islands larger than any previously colonized. The landscape is startling. Dense forests cover mountains and plains. Rivers run cold snowfalls in the high country, and winter frost reaches settled areas. Coconut, breadfruit, and banana cannot sustain communities here. Taro survives only in protected locations. Sweet potato, known as kumara, becomes crucial, but it requires careful cultivation through a shorter growing season. Gardeners select warm slopes, build windbreaks, and preserve tubers in specialized pits. Aotearoa also contains animals unlike those of tropical Polynesia. Giant flightless moa occupy forests and open country, with some species reaching extraordinary size. Seals gather along coasts and large seabird colonies offer rich food. The first generations exploit these resources heavily. Archaeological sites contain immense quantities of moa bone, revealing organized hunting. Yet moa reproduce slowly and have no defense against human hunters. Within a few centuries they are extinct. This loss forces economic and social change. Communities rely increasingly on fishing, gardening, shellfish, forest foods, and regional exchange. Fortified settlements later reflect competition over land and resources. Canoes remain essential for coastal travel and warfare, while enormous forests provide trees for large dugout vessels. Polynesian knowledge is not discarded. It is reshaped around a colder land. These three regions reveal the flexibility behind the expansion. Hawaii supports complex irrigation and large populations. Rapa Nui develops stone gardening and monumental ancestor traditions under extreme isolation. Aotearoa turns tropical horticulture into a temperate economy while confronting giant birds' winter cold and unfamiliar forests. None becomes a copy of the society that sends its first settlers. Each becomes something new. The evidence remains incomplete and many roots are still debated. Oral traditions preserve founding ancestors and homelands. Archaeology dates, settlement, genetics, traces relationships and language, reveals shared origins. Together they show that the outer corners of Polynesia are reached not by accidental castaways alone, but by communities capable of planning navigation, adaptation, and survival. By the time people live in Hawaii, Rapa Nui, and Aotearoa, the Polynesian Triangle covers an area larger than many continents. Its achievement is visible not in one empire or capital, but in human communities surviving across the most scattered habitable spaces on Earth. Their vessels leave few wooden remains, but the islands themselves become the record. Beneath villages, gardens, quarries, and ceremonial grounds lie the material clues through which archaeologists begin reconstructing routes that once existed only in memory. The voyages themselves disappear almost as soon as they end. A canoe drawn onto a beach begins to decay. Fibre lashings rot sails, tear paddles split, and wooden houses collapse into soil. Names survive in memory for a time, but memory changes with each generation. What remains for archaeologists is rarely the dramatic object people imagine. There are no fleets preserved beneath sand, no maps carved into stone, no written records listing departure dates and destinations. The evidence of movement survives in small, stubborn traces charcoal beneath a cooking fire, a fishhook lost beside a lagoon, a rat bone in an early settlement layer, a fragment of volcanic glass found thousands of kilometres from its source. These clues do not speak clearly on their own. They must be read together. A single adze may be traded. One pot may arrive as cargo. A handful of seeds may wash ashore naturally. Archaeology becomes most persuasive when many kinds of evidence converge in the same place and point toward the same human event. Settlement leaves a pattern, and that pattern is difficult to create by accident. Charcoal is one of the most useful traces. When settlers clear vegetation, cook food, warm themselves, or burn waste, microscopic fragments of carbon settle into the ground. Radiocarbon dating can estimate when the plants were burned, helping establish the age of occupation. Yet even this method is not simple. A fire made from the inner wood of an old tree may produce a date centuries earlier than the fire itself. Driftwood may already be ancient before someone gathers it from the beach. Researchers therefore prefer short-lived materials such as twig seeds or nutshells when possible, because these more closely match the moment of burning. Food remains reveal how the first settlers live. Fish bones identify the species caught and whether people are hunting near reefs in deep water or along open coasts. Shells show which lagoons and tidal zones are being harvested. Bird bones often appear in great quantities in the earliest layers, especially from species that later decline or disappear. Turtle remains seal bones, and the shells of marine mammals can mark a brief period of extraordinary abundance following human arrival. The size of the remains matters. At early sites, settlers often collect large shellfish and catch larger fish close to shore. Later layers may contain smaller specimens or species taken from more difficult environments. This change can indicate increasing pressure on nearby resources. It can also reveal growing skill population change or shifts in climate. No single explanation fully accounts for every pattern, but the bones preserve a record of human choices that written history never captures. Transported animals leave another trail. Pig, dog, and chicken bones mark deliberate movement, though their absence does not prove they were never carried. A small founding population can disappear quickly through disease storm or lack of breeding partners. Rats are often even more informative. Their arrival on previously mammal-free islands almost always signals human travel, because they do not cross vast ocean distances alone. Rat bones can be dated, and tooth marks on seeds reveal when they begin altering forests. The plants carried aboard canoes are more difficult to trace. Tropical roots and leaves decay rapidly, and cultivated plants may leave little visible material. Archaeologists search for microscopic starch grains on stone tools, impressions in pottery pollen in lake sediments, and changes in charcoal levels. They also study modern plant genetics, comparing varieties across islands, to identify relationships and possible pathways of transport. A banana growing on one island may preserve ancestry linked to populations far to the west, while a sweet potato may point toward an entirely different direction. Stone tools offer some of the strongest geographic evidence. Volcanic islands produce rock with distinct chemical signatures. Basalt from one quarry can be distinguished from basalt formed on another island through the proportions of trace elements locked inside it. When an adze found in a distant settlement matches a particular source, a connection becomes visible. The tool may have travelled in one voyage or through many exchanges, but the ocean between these places has been crossed. Obsidian is even more precise. This volcanic glass often carries a chemical fingerprint unique to one eruption or source. Tiny flakes found in early sites can be matched to islands hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. Some fragments are too small to have practical value, suggesting they arrive as part of a larger object being shaped or repaired. Others may be prized for sharpness, appearance, or ancestral significance. Their movement maps relationships that no later tradition remembers. Adzes are especially important because they sit at the center of settlement. They shape canoes, cut house posts, clear gardens, carve bowls, and prepare ritual objects. A polished adze can require many hours of labor, making it valuable enough to carry across long distances. Some are remade repeatedly as their edges break. A fragment found in a village may therefore represent years of use and several journeys before it is finally discarded. Pottery provides a different kind of map. In Lapita sites, decoration allows researchers to compare communities across a wide area. Later, where pottery becomes plain or disappears, the absence itself reflects changing practice. Clay composition can reveal whether a vessel is made locally or imported. Yet pottery must be interpreted cautiously. A design can spread without large population movement, just as a language or ritual can be adopted by neighboring communities. Canoe fragments are exceptionally rare, but they do survive in waterlogged ground caves or protected wetlands. Even a small piece of worked wood can reveal tool marks, timber choice, and construction technique. In some places, archaeologists have found paddles, hull sections, or shaped timbers that hint at vessel design. These discoveries are precious precisely because the tropical Pacific is so destructive to organic material. Settlement layout adds another layer. Post holes indicate houses, storage structures, and communal spaces. Earth ovens reveal cooking areas. Burials show how people organize the dead, and sometimes preserve evidence of ancestry, diet, disease, and movement. Chemical analysis of teeth can indicate where an individual grows up because the minerals absorbed during childhood reflect local geology and water. A person buried on one island may therefore carry a childhood signature from another. Ancient DNA has transformed parts of the story, but it survives unevenly in hot, humid environments. When recoverable, it can reveal relationships among populations and show that migration is rarely a single replacement event. Individuals from the same cemetery may possess different ancestral mixtures reflecting continued contact and intermarriage. Yet genetics cannot describe identity, language, or culture by itself. People who share ancestry may live in very different societies, while communities that speak related languages may have complex genetic histories. Even the landscape becomes an artifact. Pollen cores from swamps and lakes show when forests decline, grasses spread, and cultivated plants appear. Sediment records increased erosion after clearing. Coral reefs preserve changes in fishing pressure. Caves contain layered deposits of ash shells, tools, and bones. Every settlement alters its island, and those alterations can outlast houses, names, and political traditions. The surprising result is that the smallest objects often reveal the greatest distances. A grain of starch can record a transported crop. A rat tooth can mark a human landing. A flake of basalt can connect islands separated by weeks of sailing. None is impressive alone, but together they reconstruct an ocean crossed repeatedly and intentionally. Still, archaeology can only show where people arrive and what they leave behind. It cannot fully explain who they believe themselves to be, how they remember their origins, or how communities separated by vast waters remain connected in language and ancestry. For that, the broken objects beneath the ground must be read alongside living speech, inherited genealogy, and the deeper record carried within the human body. The human body carries a record no canoe can preserve. Inherited fragments of DNA passed from parent to child retain traces of ancient movement, long after sails, villages, and spoken names have vanished. Across the Pacific, genetic evidence reveals a history of migration that is neither simple nor uniform. It shows communities connected to island Southeast Asia, populations with deep Papuan ancestry, repeated episodes of intermarriage, periods of isolation, and later contact between islands once thought to have been permanently separated. Yet genetics does not tell the story alone. It must be read beside language genealogy and oral memory, each preserving a different part of the past. Early models often imagined Pacific settlement as a clean wave moving eastward from one origin. Modern genetic research shows a more braided history. Austronesian-speaking migrants carry ancestry linked to populations of East and Southeast Asia, but as they move through near Oceania, they encounter people whose ancestors have lived around New Guinea and the surrounding islands for tens of thousands of years. Their descendants inherit ancestry from both sources. The proportions vary widely, suggesting that contact occurs at different times and under different social conditions. Some populations show evidence that mixing continues after the first Lapita expansion. This means the communities moving into remote Oceania are not biologically frozen at the moment they leave the Bismarck archipelago. Voyagers maintain or renew contact with western islands, and later migrations introduce additional ancestry. The pattern differs between maternal and paternal genetic lines in ways that may reflect marriage practices, residence rules, or unequal movement between men and women. Scholars still debate the exact social processes behind these differences, but the genetic record clearly resists any idea of one isolated, genetically pure seafaring people. Ancient DNA adds sharper detail. Modern populations have moved and mixed for centuries, especially after European contact, making it difficult to reconstruct early settlement from living people alone. DNA recovered from ancient burials offers a closer view of particular moments. Some early Lapita individuals possess mostly East Asian-related ancestry, while later communities show stronger Papuan-related contributions. This suggests that major mixing may continue over generations rather than occurring entirely before eastward migration. The evidence remains incomplete because heat and humidity destroy DNA rapidly. Tropical soils are among the worst environments for preservation. A few surviving individuals cannot represent entire societies, and burial practices differ between islands. Genetic conclusions must therefore remain cautious. Even when ancestry can be identified, DNA cannot reveal what language a person speaks, which gods they honour, what island they consider home, or whether they see themselves as a newcomer. Language preserves another kind of descent. The hundreds of Austronesian languages spoken across the Pacific are related through patterns in vocabulary, grammar, and sound change. Linguists compare these patterns to reconstruct ancestral forms and identify branching relationships. Words for body parts, numbers, kinship, common plants, wines, boats, and everyday actions often survive long enough to reveal shared origins. When the same basic word appears in widely separated islands with regular sound differences, it points toward a common ancestral language rather than coincidence. These relationships help trace broad movements. Polynesian languages form a closely connected group within the larger Austronesian family. Hawaiian, Maori, Tahitian, Samoan, Tongan, and Rapa Nui speech differ, yet they preserve recognizable structures and related words. Their similarity reflects both relatively recent separation and continued interaction in some regions. A speaker from one island may not fully understand another, but the family resemblance remains audible across thousands of kilometers. Borrowed words complicate the map in useful ways. A language may preserve vocabulary acquired from an earlier population, a neighboring island, or a distant trading partner. Terms for unfamiliar plants, Animals, tools, and rituals often travel with the things they describe. A borrowed word can therefore reveal contact even when no artifact survives. Yet language can also spread without mass migration. A politically powerful group may impose its speech, or a mixed community may adopt one language while retaining ancestry from several populations. Place names preserve especially durable memories. Islands, reefs, channels, mountains, and landing places often carry names linked to ancestors' events or homelands. Similar names appear across distant archipelagos, suggesting that voyagers sometimes recreate familiar geographies in new places. A new island may receive the name of an older homeland, just as migrant communities elsewhere carry remembered landscapes into unfamiliar territory. These repeated names can be valuable clues, though they are difficult to date and may arise more than once. Genealogies provide a human framework for migration. Polynesian societies often preserve long lines of descent connecting living families to founding ancestors, chiefs, and voyagers. These genealogies establish rights to land status and political authority. They are not merely lists of biological relationships. They organize history according to social importance. Generations may be added, compressed, rearranged, or emphasized to support later claims, but this does not make them useless. They preserve a cultural conviction that communities begin through movement, and that ancestry remains tied to particular voyages. Oral traditions frequently describe canoes arriving from named homelands, navigators following stars, families separating after disputes, and islands discovered through birds or clouds. Some accounts include geographical details that correspond closely with real roots. Others blend historical movement with sacred origins, supernatural beings, and ancestral transformations. Modern readers sometimes try to separate literal fact from myth too sharply. In oral societies, the two can work together. A story may encode root knowledge, political legitimacy, environmental warning, and spiritual meaning at the same time. No single tradition should be treated as a perfect logbook. Stories change because they remain alive. Different families preserve different versions, and later events can be projected backward. Colonial recording adds another layer of distortion, especially when outsiders misunderstand local terms or force traditions into European historical categories. Even so, oral memory often preserves what archaeology cannot: the names of vessels, emotions surrounding departure, the importance of particular ancestors, and the moral meaning of settlement. A lesser-known strength of oral navigation is redundancy. Root knowledge can be stored across star charts, genealogies, place name sequences, weather sayings, and ceremonial performances. If one form fades, another may preserve part of the same information. A song about an ancestor's journey may also contain the order of islands along a route. A story about a bird may encode the season when that species flies toward land. Memory survives by being woven into culture rather than stored in one specialized document. Together, genes, languages, and traditions reveal both continuity and change. DNA shows ancestry moving through bodies. Language traces communities of speech. Genealogy explains belonging. Oral history preserves intention and meaning. They often agree broadly while differing in detail because they record different dimensions of the same past. What survives in the record suggests that the Pacific world is created through repeated connection, not one irreversible departure. People leave, return, marry across islands, adopt new speech, remember old homelands, and transform inherited traditions. Yet one clue points beyond the familiar boundaries of Polynesia toward another continent. It is a crop carried in gardens, a word preserved in several languages, and perhaps a genetic trace of contact across the eastern Pacific: the sweet potato. The sweet potato appears in Polynesian gardens as if it has crossed an impossible boundary. Its deeper ancestry lies in South America, where indigenous peoples cultivate related varieties long before Europeans enter the Pacific. Yet by the time European ships begin recording life across eastern Polynesia, the crop is already established on islands separated from the American coast by thousands of kilometers of open ocean. It is known by closely related names in several Polynesian languages, grown in places as distant as Hawaii, Rapa Nui and Aotearoa, and woven into food systems that could not have developed overnight. Somewhere in the prehistory of the Pacific, people, plants or both have crossed the Eastern Ocean. In tropical Polynesia, the sweet potato supplements older crops such as taro yam and breadfruit. In cooler or drier environments, it becomes far more important. Hawaiians cultivate it in regions where rainfall is too uncertain for irrigated taro. On Rapa Nui, it grows within carefully engineered stone gardens that trap moisture and protect soil from wind. In Aotearoa, the kumara becomes one of the few tropical crops capable of surviving at the edge of its climatic range, though only through intensive care, warm garden sites, storage pits and strict seasonal knowledge. Its presence in Aotearoa is especially revealing. Polynesian settlers reached those islands around the 13th century, already carrying sweet potato varieties and the knowledge required to cultivate them. This means the crop must have entered the Polynesian world earlier, somewhere farther north or east. It is not a recent curiosity acquired from Europeans. It is part of the voyaging package that accompanies the final stages of settlement. The linguistic clue is equally striking. Variations of the word kumara or uala appear across parts of Polynesia, while related terms for sweet potato exist in languages of northwestern South America. Similar words can arise by coincidence, and sounds can change over centuries, so vocabulary alone cannot prove direct contact. Yet the resemblance has long attracted attention because it accompanies a plant whose biological origin lies on the American continent. Language and botany seem to be preserving the same unusual connection. For generations, scholars have debated how the crop crosses the Pacific. One possibility is natural dispersal. Sweet potato seeds can under some conditions survive exposure to salt water, and floating plant material might travel with currents. Birds have also been proposed as carriers, though the distances and survival requirements make the mechanism uncertain. If the plant arrives naturally, Polynesian settlers could discover it growing on an island and begin cultivating it without ever contacting South America. This explanation cannot be dismissed completely, but it faces difficulties. The sweet potato found across Polynesia is not merely a wild plant noticed by chance. It is maintained through human cultivation, transported between islands and embedded within language and tradition. Natural arrival might account for the first appearance of the species, but it does not explain the full cultural pattern. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single dispersal experiment can recreate all the conditions of a prehistoric crossing. Another possibility is that South American voyagers carry the crop westward. Coastal peoples of the Americas possess sophisticated rafts, fishing traditions, and knowledge of ocean currents. Large balsa vessels can remain at sea for extended periods, and the westward moving trade winds and currents offer a route into the Pacific. This possibility inspired famous 20th century experiments showing that a raft could drift from South America toward Polynesia. But demonstrating that a voyage is physically possible does not prove that it happened, or that South Americans played the primary role in settling Polynesia. Archaeology, language, genetics, and material culture overwhelmingly connect Polynesian origins to the West through island Southeast Asia and near Oceania. The idea that Polynesian civilization is founded by migrants from South America is not supported by the broader evidence. At most, eastward-moving American voyagers may have made limited contact with Polynesian communities already established in the central or eastern Pacific. The difference is crucial. Contact is not the same as colonization. The third possibility is that Polynesian voyagers reach the American coast and return with the crop. By the time eastern Polynesia is settled, navigators have already completed voyages of comparable difficulty. Rapa Nui lies far to the east, and communities there possess vessels, food systems, and navigational traditions shaped by centuries of exploration. Continuing farther towards South America would be dangerous, but not beyond the demonstrated capabilities of Polynesian seafaring. A voyage eastward faces prevailing winds, yet those winds vary. Periods of altered weather can produce westerly winds that assist travel toward the Americas. A crew reaching the continent could later return westward, using the more common trade winds. The voyage need not begin as a deliberate attempt to discover a continent. Storm displacement, exploratory sailing, or travel from an eastern island might bring navigators within range of coastal signs. The South American coast would not be easy to miss in the same way as a low coral atoll. Mountain ranges, river water, seabirds, floating vegetation smoke, and coastal currents create a broad zone of detection. Once ashore, Polynesian visitors would encounter densely inhabited landscapes with crops, technologies, and societies unlike any in Oceania. The sweet potato would be an obvious food to carry home. It produces energy-rich tubers, grows from cuttings, and tolerates conditions unsuitable for many traditional Polynesian staples. Transporting it back would still require care. Fresh tubers intended for eating are not necessarily ideal planting material after weeks at sea. Viable vines or roots must survive salt spray heat and dehydration. Yet Polynesian settlers routinely carry fragile crops across long distances. The same horticultural expertise that transports taro banana and breadfruit could preserve sweet potato cuttings on a return voyage. Genetic studies of the plant have produced changing and sometimes conflicting interpretations. Some analyses suggest that Polynesian varieties are related to South American lineages in ways consistent with prehistoric human transport. Others indicate that certain genetic divisions may be much older than human settlement of the Pacific, leaving room for natural dispersal. Modern contamination complicates the picture, because Europeans later moved sweet potato varieties around the world, mixing lineages that had once been geographically separate. Ancient specimens offer stronger evidence than modern crops, but they are rare. Preserved sweet potato remains from archaeological contexts can confirm that the plant is present before European contact, yet they do not easily reveal the exact route by which it arrives. Genetic material degrades, labels are sometimes uncertain, and cultivated plants change through selection. Scholars still debate how many introductions occur and whether different varieties enter Polynesia at different times. Human genetics has added another layer. Some studies identify ancestry shared between certain Polynesian and indigenous South American populations, with models placing contact before European arrival, perhaps around the early centuries of the second millennium. The strongest signals appear in parts of eastern Polynesia, rather than uniformly across every island. This pattern is consistent with limited contact, followed by movement among Polynesian communities, though the direction of the initial voyage remains difficult to prove. The finding does not mean that large American populations migrate throughout Polynesia. The signal is small, and later movements between islands can spread it far from the original meeting place. One encounter involving a limited number of people may leave descendants across several archipelagos centuries later. Genetics can reveal that contact probably occurs, but it cannot tell whether the first canoe travels east or west, whether travelers return voluntarily, or how the meeting is understood by either society. Rapa Nui naturally occupies the centre of speculation because it lies closest to South America, but it may not be the only candidate. Contact could occur elsewhere in eastern Polynesia, followed by the transport of crops and people through existing voyaging networks. Islands that seem isolated on a modern map may once have been linked by routes now forgotten. The sweet potato itself could move much farther than the people who first acquire it. What survives in the record suggests a prehistoric Pacific that is more connected than older histories allowed. The crop its names and emerging genetic evidence make some form of Polynesian South American contact increasingly plausible. Yet the mystery is not completely solved. Natural dispersal remains possible for part of the botanical story. The direction of human travel is uncertain, and the scale of interaction appears limited. The sweet potato therefore stands as a modest but extraordinary artifact. It leaves no monumental ruin and carries no inscription. It grows quietly beneath the soil, reproducing through cuttings passed from gardener to gardener. Yet inside that ordinary root lies evidence of one of the longest possible contacts in the ancient world, a crossing made between societies separated by the greatest ocean on Earth. Once the possibility of contact between Polynesia and South America is admitted even cautiously, the history of the Pacific becomes vulnerable to exaggeration. A small amount of credible evidence can attract much larger claims, and the space between what is possible and what is proven quickly fills with speculation. The sweet potato, a limited genetic signal, and the demonstrated range of Polynesian navigation support the idea that at least some people crossed the eastern Pacific before Europeans. They do not support every story of vanished fleets, secret empires, or outsiders founding Pacific civilization. The distinction matters because the history of Polynesian achievement has repeatedly been reshaped by theories that give the most important role to someone else. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, many European scholars struggled to accept that island societies could have deliberately settled the Pacific using indigenous technology. Some assume that the inhabitants of distant islands must be survivors of a lost continent. Others propose migrations from Egypt, Phoenicia, India, the Middle East, or the Americas. Similarities in monuments, myths, or artistic patterns are treated as evidence of direct contact even when they arise independently or are connected only through very broad human experience. Stone platforms and large statues attract particular attention. The moai of Rapa Nui are compared with monuments from civilizations thousands of kilometers away. Step-like ceremonial structures across Polynesia are linked to pyramids elsewhere. Rectangular stonework solar observations and ancestral worship are presented as if they are too unusual to develop independently. Yet societies across the world build elevated sacred spaces, observe the sky, honor the dead, and move heavy stone. Resemblance alone does not establish migration. The most famous challenge to the Western origin of Polynesian settlement emerges in the 20th century through Thor Heyerdahl and the voyage of the Kon-Tiki. Heyerdahl argues that at least some Polynesian ancestors may have come from South America. In 1947, he and his crew sail a balsa raft westward from Peru, relying largely on winds and currents, and eventually reach the Tuamotu region. The expedition captures global attention because it demonstrates that a relatively simple raft can survive the crossing. The voyage is courageous and historically important as an experiment, but its conclusion is often overstated. Kon-Tiki proves that a raft can travel from South America into Polynesia under favourable conditions. It does not prove that ancient South Americans settle the islands, nor does it outweigh the linguistic, archaeological, genetic and cultural evidence linking Polynesians primarily to island Southeast Asia and near Oceania. A route can be possible without being the main route actually taken. Heyerdahl's theory also reflects assumptions common in his time. Polynesian navigational knowledge is underestimated while drifting with wind and current is treated as more plausible than deliberate sailing from the west. Yet later revivals of traditional navigation show that Pacific voyagers can maintain courses, find islands and complete return journeys without modern instruments. The people who settle Polynesia are not passive passengers pushed across the ocean. They are active navigators shaping their movement around wind seasons and remembered routes. Accidental drift still has a place in the story. Canoes are caught in storms, sails fail, and crews are carried away from intended destinations. Some islands may first be sighted by people who do not mean to reach them. Castaways can survive extraordinary distances if rain provides water and currents carry them toward land. But drift alone cannot explain the repeated settlement of remote archipelagos with families, crops, animals, tools, and socially organized communities. Accidents may reveal islands. Planned voyages are needed to colonize them successfully. The direction of contact with South America remains less certain. Polynesians may sail east and return. South American mariners may travel west. Both may occur at different times. Winds can shift and maritime peoples on both sides possess capable vessels. What survives in the record suggests contact on a limited scale rather than invasion or mass migration. A few people, a crop, and new knowledge can move between societies without transforming either one completely. Other proposed evidence has generated intense debate. Chicken bones found at a pre-European site in Chile were once interpreted as proof that Polynesian voyagers carried chickens to South America. Early genetic analysis appeared to connect the remains with Pacific lineages. Later research questioned the dating, contamination controls, and genetic interpretation. The claim remains disputed. It is possible that chickens arrived through Polynesian contact, but the evidence is not yet secure enough to treat the case as settled. Human skeletal remains have also been used to argue for ancient contact. Certain skull shapes in South America or the Pacific have been described as resembling populations from distant regions. Such comparisons are unreliable when used alone. Human anatomy varies within populations, changes over time, and can be influenced by diet, environment, and cultural practices. Modern genetics offers more direct evidence, but even genetic similarities require careful dating, because later colonial-era movement can imitate older connections. Claims involving coconuts, bottle gourds, and other transported plants present similar problems. Some species may float across oceans naturally. Others are carried by humans over thousands of years. Genetic relationships can reveal shared ancestry, but not always the route or date of dispersal. A plant found on both sides of the Pacific may represent prehistoric contact, natural movement or introductions occurring after Europeans begin connecting the oceans. Each species requires its own evidence. More dramatic theories propose Chinese treasure fleets, Japanese fishermen, Phoenician sailors, Egyptians, or even survivors of Atlantis as the true founders of Pacific societies. These ideas usually depend on vague artistic resemblance, questionable inscriptions, or objects removed from clear archaeological context. There is no credible evidence that any of these groups establishes Polynesia. Isolated visitors from Asia or the Americas may conceivably reach Pacific islands at different times, but an occasional arrival is very different from creating the languages, social systems, agriculture, and navigational traditions found across Oceania. The lost continent theory remains especially persistent. Because islands are scattered across such a vast area, some writers imagine them as the peaks of a sunken landmass destroyed by catastrophe. Geology offers no support for a recently submerged Pacific continent inhabited by an advanced civilization. Volcanic islands rise, erode, and sink over millions of years, while sea levels change with ice ages. Low coastal landscapes have certainly drowned, but not a continent resembling the legendary worlds proposed in popular accounts. These unsupported stories often reveal more about the societies inventing them than about the Pacific past. They emerge from difficulty accepting that communities without writing metal compasses or centralized empires can achieve extraordinary feats. Monumental buildings are credited to foreigners. Navigation is reduced to luck. Oral traditions are dismissed until archaeology confirms parts of them. The mystery is preserved by denying the competence of the people whose ancestors solved it. A more careful history does not remove wonder. It deepens it. Polynesian settlement requires no vanished super-civilization. It grows from generations of boat-building observation, memory experimentation, and loss. Contact with South America, where supported, becomes one achievement within that larger tradition, rather than proof that Polynesians come from the East. Scholars still debate root dates and the scale of individual encounters. New ancient DNA, improved dating, and underwater archaeology may alter parts of the picture, yet the broad conclusion is firm. The Pacific is settled primarily by descendants of communities moving eastward through the Austronesian and Lapita worlds, transformed through contact with Papuan peoples, and adapted over centuries in western Polynesia. Their later reach towards South America adds complexity, not replacement. The ocean does not need invented empires to become mysterious. Its true history already contains voyages beyond sight of land knowledge, carried without writing, crops transported across impossible distances, and societies surviving where no one had lived before. The final legacy of those journeys is not confined to ancient bones or disputed plants. It remains alive in communities that continue to read the ocean, rebuild voyaging canoes, and reclaim a history once described by outsiders as accidental. The ancient roots do not disappear when written history begins. They survive beneath new borders, colonial names, and modern nation-states. Across the Pacific, descendants of the first voyagers continue to speak related languages, cultivate transported crops, maintain genealogies tied to founding canoes, and remember islands as part of a connected ancestral world. European colonization, disease, forced conversion, labor recruitment, and political control disrupt these traditions profoundly, yet do not erase them. The ocean highway endures because it is carried in communities, not merely in vessels. When European ships arrive from the 16th century onward, they often misunderstand what they encounter. Islands appear isolated because foreign charts show vast distances between them. Voyaging societies are treated as scattered peoples separated by empty water. In reality, many communities still preserve memories of exchange, migration, and kinship across the sea. Oral histories describe a world whose boundaries are defined less by coastlines than by relationships. Colonial rule weakens this system in several ways. Foreign governments restrict movement, impose borders, and replace indigenous authority with administrative districts. Missionaries sometimes condemn chant ceremonies and navigational practices as pagan. Imported boats alter maritime life. Schools teach European geography while dismissing oral knowledge as legend. Epidemics reduce populations so severely in some islands that specialized knowledge disappears with those who hold it. A tradition can survive storms for centuries and still be lost within one generation if its teachers die without students. Environmental damage adds another layer. Invasive species transform island ecosystems. Forest clearing accelerates under plantations and commercial logging. Coral reefs suffer from pollution, overfishing, and warming seas. Nuclear testing displaces communities and contaminates ancestral lands. Rising sea levels threaten low atolls whose settlement required generations of careful adaptation. The descendants of the first colonizers face a new form of oceanic uncertainty, created not by an unknown horizon but by global forces far beyond the islands. Yet Pacific societies do not remain passive. Cultural resilience appears in language revival, traditional agriculture, canoe building, dance tattooing, storytelling and the restoration of sacred sites. Communities recover old place names and genealogies from family memory archival recordings and surviving specialists. Gardeners preserve heritage varieties of taro, yam, breadfruit, and sweet potato. Fishers restore seasonal restrictions and reef practices that once balanced harvesting with renewal. These are not attempts to return unchanged to the past. They carry inherited knowledge into altered conditions. The revival of non-instrument navigation becomes one of the strongest symbols of this endurance. By the 20th century, many outsiders assume the ancient methods are gone. In parts of Micronesia, however, navigators still preserve systems of star courses, swells, birds, and island relationships. Their knowledge becomes crucial to a wider Pacific effort to restore long-distance voyaging. Pius Maupiailug is a navigator from Satawal in the Caroline Islands. Raised within a living tradition, he agrees to teach beyond his own community when few younger people are continuing the discipline. His decision is extraordinary, because such knowledge has often been protected within families and specialist lineages. By sharing it, he helps revive a practice many believe has vanished. In 1976, the reconstructed double-hulled canoe Hokulea sails from Hawaii to Tahiti without modern navigational instruments guided by Maupiailug. The voyage does not recreate every detail of ancient technology, and it cannot prove one exact prehistoric route. Its importance lies elsewhere. It demonstrates that traditional principles can guide a vessel across thousands of kilometers of open ocean with precision. The successful landfall challenges the old claim that Polynesian settlement is mostly accidental. The voyage also transforms identity. Hawaiians and other Pacific peoples see ancestral navigation not as a dead curiosity, but as a living intellectual system. New generations train as navigators and canoe builders. Hokulea later travels across the Pacific carrying messages about cultural renewal and environmental responsibility. Similar projects emerge in Aotearoa, Tahiti, the Cook Islands, and Samoa. Canoes again connect communities separated by colonial boundaries. These voyages reveal that navigation is more than technical skill. It requires patience, discipline, cooperation, and trust. A navigator makes decisions from incomplete signs while remaining responsible for everyone aboard. The crew depends on shared labour rationing maintenance and calm under uncertainty. In this sense, the canoe becomes a model of island society itself, limited in space and resources, vulnerable to carelessness, yet capable of crossing enormous distances when people act together. Modern archaeology has also changed through collaboration with indigenous communities. Researchers increasingly recognize that oral history, traditional ecological knowledge, and local expertise can guide excavations, identify place names, explain artifact use, and reveal routes overlooked by outsiders. Communities also demand control over ancestral remains, sacred objects, and the interpretation of their own history. The descendants of the Voyagers are not merely subjects of research. They are historians, navigators, linguists, and custodians of the record. This shift matters because the older language of discovery often erases prior knowledge. Europeans are described as discovering islands already inhabited by societies whose ancestors crossed far greater distances to reach them. Maps name seas and lands after foreign captains while ignoring indigenous names that preserve deeper histories. Restoring those names changes the geography. It turns isolated dots back into places connected by genealogy, travel, and memory. The environmental consequences of early settlement remain part of the legacy. Human arrival contributes to extinctions, deforestation, and lasting ecological change. Polynesian societies are neither perfect conservationists nor uniquely destructive. They make mistakes, adapt, impose restrictions, and develop management systems as resources decline. The lesson is not that ancient islanders live outside nature, but that small environments reveal the consequences of human decisions with unusual speed. Today, climate change gives those lessons renewed urgency. Low islands face saltwater intrusion, coastal erosion, damaged reefs, and the possibility of displacement. Communities that once carried entire worlds aboard canoes may again be forced to move, though now under conditions they did not create. Their history offers no simple solution, but it demonstrates that mobility does not equal cultural disappearance. A people can cross water, settle elsewhere, and still carry language, ancestry, and identity. What survives in the records suggests that the greatest achievement of the forgotten seafarers is not merely reaching distant islands. It is creating a durable human geography across the largest ocean on Earth. Their descendants continue to inhabit that geography even when outsiders divide it into remote territories. The Pacific is not an empty barrier with islands scattered inside it. It is a sea of roots, names, obligations, and remembered arrivals. The old navigators do not leave monuments visible from space. They leave something more difficult to destroy: communities that still know the horizon can be crossed. The canoe rests lightly on the evening water. Its sail is lowered, its lashings dark with spray, and the island behind it fades into the same blue distance that once concealed every shore from those who sailed before. The sea seems empty again, though it is not. Beneath the surface, currents continue along routes older than memory. Swells travel from storms no one aboard has seen. Birds return toward nests hidden beyond the horizon. Stars wait above the fading light, ready to rise into their familiar paths. Thousands of years have passed since the first families carried fire roots, animals, tools, and hope into remote Oceania. Their names are mostly gone. Their canoes have returned to soil, reef, and salt. The beaches where they landed have shifted, and some lie underwater. Yet the journeys remain visible in gardens, languages, bones, stories, and the quiet resemblance between words spoken on islands separated by enormous distances. The Pacific keeps history differently from a continent. It offers few roads to excavate and few walls to measure. It preserves absence as much as evidence. Between every two islands lies a space where lives may have vanished without trace, where a sail may have broken beneath cloud, or where a navigator may have found a star after days of uncertainty and guided everyone home. That uncertainty is part of the achievement. The Voyagers do not possess perfect knowledge. They sail because observation, memory, preparation, and trust make action possible before certainty arrives. They understand that the horizon hides danger, but also land, kinship, and futures that cannot exist unless someone leaves the familiar shore. Now on islands from Hawaii to Rapa Nui and from Samoa to Aotearoa, the descendants of those crossings look again toward a changing ocean. Some rebuild canoes, some restore languages, some protect reefs and gardens, some carry ancestral names into cities far from the sea. The form of the voyage changes, but the deeper movement continues, and as darkness settles across the water, the Pacific no longer appears as a void. It becomes what it has always been to those who know how to read it: a living landscape, without roads, a vast archive written in waves, and a bridge made visible only when someone remembers the way across.